Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Today's topic is systemic family constellation, and my very special guest is Georgia Howorth Fair. And Georgia is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Orlando, Florida. This is Soulful Conversations, and I'm your host, Liz Naughton. Welcome, Georgia. We're also incredibly excited that you have joined us here today to talk about this fascinating healing modality. I'm not going to pretend to know all of its depths, so I would like to just turn this over directly to you. And if you don't mind, if we could start out with today's talk by simply kind of telling us what systemic family constellation is.
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a topic that I just am on fire about. And so, systemic family constellations is a process that was developed by a family therapist from Germany, whose name is Bert Hellinger. Bert Hellinger grew up during in Germany, born just before or right around the time of World War I. And so during World War II, he was either going to be sent away by the Nazis. So he decided to become a German soldier, lived through World War II, and upon leaving the service, became a Catholic priest. And so part of his journey was they sent him to Africa to convert the Zulu. And while he was there, the Zulu converted him and taught him about the power of family, the importance of being part of a tribe, how important it is to belong somewhere. And when he came back from working with the Zulu, he was able to translate what he learned from the Zulu into this process, which we now today call systemic family constellation work. And so there's a little bit of family therapy, there's a little bit of understanding what ancestral trauma is, and I'll talk with you more about that in a moment. And there's an access to the morphic field, which the morphic field is known by many names. It could be called the ether, it could be called emptiness in Buddhist tradition, but the morphic field, or the field, is where we find the connection to not just what happens between us here today, but our connection to our ancestors, our connection to what has already passed. And also because many of us have children, to what we pass down to our own kids. So ancestral trauma is treated when we do a family constellation, because those are the things that tend to show up in our lives today, patterns or unexplained difficulties that no matter how hard we try, we just simply can't seem to get past.
Oh, that's so interesting. Is this also, or can you tell us a little bit more about what transgenerational trauma is?
So transgenerational trauma exists because something happens in generations back, where something has happened that it could be families caught in war, could be coming from our homeland, the country of our origin, to a new land. So there's nobody in this country that doesn't come from somewhere, because we came across the ocean and we settled here, whether it was from Europe or from Africa or from South America, Asia, just we all came to settle here. And in the process of that happening, tragic things can occur. So if they're not worked out in the current generation where the tragedy occurred, it gets passed on to our offspring. So we're just beginning to understand how trauma is transmitted from one generation to the next. There have been studies with mice where the mother mouse is exposed to a very loud, frightening sound, and we can see in her offspring a sensitivity to loud sound, and we can even see in the offspring of that offspring a sensitivity to loud sound. So we can see that at least 3 generations of mice who were exposed still react to it. It seems to extinguish itself. It seems to go away after the 4th generation, but there's even reference in the Bible about the sins of the father being visited upon the sons. And so
Right.
we've known about this. We've known about this for a long time, but now we're just really starting to study it and start to heal it. So
Wow.
transgenerational trauma can show up in a variety of different ways. One way is that, let's say you start a business. Just for example, you start a business and for some reason you keep starting a business and starting a business and starting a business, and they just don't seem to take, even though the idea is good, you've got all the resources available to you. And so we would talk about, well, let's talk about businesses that your father might have started or businesses that his father might have started. And we start to try to see if we can trace back through where there might have been a break, where there might have been a trauma. So something like that could look like, so just as following that example, we go back to maybe your father or your grandfather, and maybe your grandfather started a business and he either lost it or someone came in and ruined his business or tried to take his business away from him. And so because of what we call unconscious loyalties, they're not in our conscious, we don't understand, we don't even know that we have them. You're kind of trying to work out that issue in your life today. So
it's kind of like on the behalf of your grandfather today, I would be trying to work that out.
yes, that's right. Or so someone that I worked with a couple of weeks ago did a constellation on why she has such a difficult time with men. And she can't enter into a relationship and keep it alive and growing. And so when we went back into her lineage, we saw that her great grandmother, so not her mother, but not her grandmother, but her great grandmother, could not protect the grandmother from being abused by the men in the family. And so she could never understand why she would be afraid around, my client could never understand why she'd be afraid around these men that she was getting in relationship with and shut down physically to them, because it goes all the way back to her grandmother who was sexually abused and couldn't find the resources to heal, right? Because we didn't really even talk about sexual abuse until more in my generation. And certainly now we talk about sexual abuse and how much it happens, to the point where we really know that about 50% of women and 25% of men have been sexually abused at least once in their childhood, which is just insane when you think about it, but it's true. So that's what we do. And so we can do family constellation work in a group setting, which is optimal. It's and what happens is that people will represent the different players in a constellation. They call representatives. So they rep for people. And what we talk about this, we say that someone is lending their nervous system to another person's soul. And so representatives can actually feel and think and experience what these ancestors felt. It's very powerful, but there are there are other ways we can do a constellation. So, yeah, that's kind of what
Well,
a
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for those examples. It kind of, I think that definitely begins to explain what the systemic family constellation is. So how would I know if I am being affected by transgenerational trauma? And just in my everyday life, like what should I be looking for? I mean, what would be like that? It's like, oh,
So usually
um,
what I clue into is someone coming to me and telling me that they, no matter how much they process something in their therapy or talk to other people about it or worked on it or whatever, it just doesn't seem to go away. It's a pattern that they just can't get past. It could be like, why do I keep losing jobs? Why can't I hold a job? Why can't I stay in a relationship? Why do I continue to fight with my mother even though I want to have a good relationship with my mother? So
so
we go ahead.
does this ever go away? I mean, do they get resolution?
So we don't know after a constellation what's going to happen. It's sort of like we construct this little tiny nugget. I actually like to think of it more like we planted some seeds. And now we have to sort of stand back and let whatever happens happen after we do a constellation. So there's no way to guarantee an outcome. But generally, I'll ask people when we set up a constellation, what do you want to get from this? What would you like to happen? Um, so, for example, a constellation, not that I facilitated, but I was part of, the facilitator had a very dear friend who had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, death sentence. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, you're getting your affairs in order
Oh
quickly.
boy.
And so he did constellation work. He started meditating. He cleaned up his diet, and he also did the traditional Western medical treatment. But through the series of the 3 constellations that we did with him, where we had someone representing the pancreatic cancer and what the message was in that, this man is still alive today. This was 5 years ago we did this, and
Wow.
it's cancer free.
Wow.
Things like that can happen in a constellation, but we don't know what's going to happen. We can't guarantee.
So for example, could I come to you and ask that we do a like a family constellation for like one of my kids or my spouse or even like my best friend? How does is that possible?
So we don't do constellations like that, but we can look at your relationship with your spouse, or we can look at your relationship with your children, or we can look at your relationship with your best friend and see if there's something there that has happened in your ancestry that would cause you to have difficulties in any of those relationships. So I've done constellations with people where we look at the addiction in their family, because usually that's what causes so much heartbreak with parents and their children, right? Their children become addicted and they're lost to them, basically. Um, or I've done, constellations with people that have had a big break with their family, like they're estranged from their siblings or they're estranged from their parents, and try to look at why that would have happened. But um, again, I can't guarantee no one can guarantee what's going to happen in a constellation because we simply don't know. But what we find is when you do heal that trauma, that generational, that ancestral trauma, things start to happen that can put families back together again, which is really what we want, right? We don't want to be estranged from our family.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that we might not have a crazy family, so it's better to sort of love them from a distance, but um, they are our family. They are our tribe. They are where we came from.
So I'm just curious. So when you heal, does everyone in the family heal?
Yes, everyone benefits from the constellation. And the constellation is not about trying to get people to change. It's about inviting healing into the system, the family system. So I had a client several years ago that was very well trained, was, had a PhD, was working very diligently to try to get something going in her field. And she just couldn't keep a job, couldn't keep a job, couldn't keep a job. And we did go look back in her lineage and find that her great grandfather had had his livelihood taken away from him by another family member. And when she went back and did some genealogical work, there was newspaper clippings that she found about this
Mhm.
very thing.
Wow.
So, again, when you lend your nervous system to another soul, things will come to light that you had no idea were in existence. Family secrets, finding out that your brother is not really your brother, he might be a half sibling, or he came from a, whole different, um, came from your mother's sister, your father's sister, and taken in, but treated as one of their children. Family secrets can be a huge cause of problems in a family.
And that kind of takes away just the baffling part of life where it's like, I just don't even know why I do that.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
cool. Well, what about the people that are actually the participants that lend themselves to become a part of another person's nervous system per se? How do they benefit from being a part of that person's journey?
So when you're picked to be a representative in a group setting, you know how things work. You're picked for a reason.
Mm.
And so a lot of times people will find that they feel some peace in themselves around the system that got healed, or the system that was getting the healing, but that they also carry some of that into their own lives. So there's no accidents really when you're doing a constellation, that people get picked for a reason. And so um, representatives, and people will tell you after they've represented in a constellation that they feel their body feels different, that they usually are feeling tired because it's a very intense process, but that they feel better, that there's a peace about them that they weren't experiencing before.
Oh, that's wonderful. So how many would you say, how many therapists are actually doing this type of work in the US?
So you don't have to be a therapist to do a constellation, to be a constellation facilitator. There are some very good facilitators that I know that are not psychotherapists. I think that you just have to kind of look in your area to see if there's anybody that's doing them locally. But you can do constellations in person, or you can do constellations online. When I started doing constellation work, when I started my training, it was during right at the very beginning of COVID, like
Oh,
the
no.
weekend
Yeah.
of COVID.
Oh, no.
And so we met in person that weekend, and then everything shut down. The whole world shut down. And so we went online, and we were taught how to constellate online, and it's very effective. So um, you don't have to be in person, and just energy, transcends time and space. So um, like any energy modality, when you know that you're working in the field, you don't have to be right with the person that you're working with. So I do constellations with people from, right now I'm doing them with people from all over the world.
That's so amazing. And how did you hear about this? How did you get involved with the constellation work to begin with?
So I actually was invited to participate in a workshop here in Orlando with a woman who had met these three women. They were all from Miami, and they were doing constellation work. It was a physician, a nurse, and a psychotherapist. And the interesting part about that was when you work in the constellation field, the way I was taught anyway, is that you stay with the ancestors, you work with the ancestors. And sometimes people don't just work with the ancestors, they also work with spirits and other kinds of guides or other kinds of entities. And so what happened was that the women that were doing the constellation work that in the workshop that I went to, all became very sick. And so they stopped doing the constellation work. So I was looking around, hoping for something to find another kind of training. And I came upon this woman who was from New Mexico, and she was actually doing a workshop in New Orleans. And that's where I went the weekend that COVID shut down the world.
Mm.
So I went to New Orleans and met her and started in her program. And then I left that program after a couple of years, and now I'm in a international constellator training program, which has just been fabulous. Get all of the constellation elders from all over the world, the ones that worked with Bert Hellinger, who passed in I want to say 2019.
Wow.
Yeah, he just passed very recently. Yeah, I think it was 2019. So like all of the elders in the field who worked with him 25, 30 years before. So it's been around for a while. It's been much more active in Europe and South America. In fact, Brazil seems to always be on the cutting edge of all of the new kinds of therapies, but this one really has got a good, strong footing in Europe, and
Wow.
it's becoming more well known in the United States.
So I'm curious to know, does it also, just that whole idea, when you raise your consciousness, it's kind of you're raising the consciousness of the world. Is it that type of thing also? So as more and more people do these constellations and they heal their ancestry, are we kind of healing the consciousness that has gone along with those different periods of time? For example, the thinking and the beliefs around war or around different genders and things like that. Do you understand what I'm asking?
I do. I think there has to be something, because I know that that first weekend
Mhm.
in New Orleans, we did a constellation on COVID, and it seemed like the countries that were involved, United States and China, um, had some things that they needed to reconcile and were having trouble doing, which is
That's interesting.
yeah, something that we're still seeing getting played out today, right? I'm, I'm, I know that some people have commented just on looking at how, well, I'm going to kind of stay away from that because it's so politically charged right now. I don't want to get anything stirred up, but just how some countries are that have had horrible things happen to the people in those countries, then turn around and do the same thing. Whether it be cause, people to have famine, they
Mhm.
came from famine, then they caused a famine or something like that. So I think that the more that we become enlightened, so to speak, the more that we heal that trauma, the more everyone benefits from it. Don't they always say that the peace in the world begins with us?
Right.
So the more we do our own healing work, the less conflicted we will be. And so we can kind of pass that along, not just to our offspring, but to the people in our life.
Oh, that's beautiful. So how would you say that you have changed as a result of doing this work?
Oh my goodness. So any facilitator who wants to work in this field really has to begin by doing their own work. And so first of all, there are so many things in my own family. Like I had no connection with my mother's family at all. She never talked about well, she talked about them a little bit, but not necessarily with me. And so I had never even seen a picture of my mother's parents, who both died before I was born. And so when I started to really understand, my mother passed in 2005. When I started to understand some of the trauma that she grew up with. Her father died when she was 7, and she was kind of sent to live with all of these different siblings. She was the youngest of 8 children that survived. I began to learn in my own life why I would get triggered by someone wanting something from me. And so, or being wanted by someone. So those things started to become much clearer to me. So, and even my husband and I bought a house in South Carolina, and we're going to retire there hopefully in the next couple of years. And we were just having problem after problem after problem with people that were coming to the house and working on it and not finishing. And so you can see the pattern there, right? Just having the same problem over and over again. Ooh, excuse me. Get a drink here. And so we did a constellation for the house and the land the house sat on. So the land that the house sits on was part of a huge indigenous people's land that they were kicked off of, obviously. And also the lake that the house sits near was dammed up to provide electricity for the area. So all of the people that lived in that area were displaced when this company came in and dammed up the lake. In fact, you can find at the bottom of this lake in some places buildings that were churches and things like that, where people worshiped, where they lived. So we kind of cleared and honored that those things had happened and that the land had either been stolen from them or used for other purposes, and people were displaced. So how has that worked? And for the house is fine now. The house, we got all that gunk out of the way, and the house is wonderful. It's a place that we love.
It's just so interesting how once you truly acknowledge something, how everything comes to resolution. So
Yes.
it kind of gets back to what you were saying, that, we're really only as sick as our secrets. So as soon as it's out and it's like the light is brought to whatever that challenge or issue is, how it's able to like just go back into into stasis.
The energy flows the way that it's
Yeah.
supposed to. So when there's trauma, the energy stops. It gets entangled. It gets just think about, when water gets dammed up, it can't flow. And that's the same thing that happens with energy after there's a trauma. So, we do a lot of acknowledging. There's three basic tenets in a systemic family constellations. And one is that belonging. We all belong. So we always are looking in constellation work for what's been excluded, whether it be the black sheep of the family, or a parent that divorced and walked away, and people just never acknowledged someone who died, maybe in childbirth, that was never talked about by either parent. So we're always looking for what's excluded. And then the second thing that we're looking for is the flow of order. So in normal functioning, happy functioning families, parents give to children, children grow up and they give to their children, and just on down the line. But in dysfunctional families, children are raised up to take care of parents. And so we try to work to restore the flow of giving, and that there's always giving and taking in a family, but sometimes again that is disrupted, the flow of giving. And then the last thing is the last tenet of family constellation work is acknowledging. So we acknowledge what is true. And that's where the issues around secrets come in, or just even the hidden loyalties, like children that get triangulated into parents' dysfunctional marriage might say to their parents, I give you back the problems in your marriage, and I take myself out. So that's what a constellation can look like, can work like.
Wow. So that creates complete freedom for that child.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, Georgia, thank you so very much. If you would like to get a hold of Georgia or know more about her.
So it's www.aitorlando.com.
Okay, awesome. Thanks again. This is Soulful Conversations with Modern Day Healers. Until next time, please know that you are loved, and namaste.